I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a single photograph, when my entire life rearranged itself in about 4 seconds. Not because of what was in the photo, because of what was written on the back. A date, a name, and a single sentence that told me the woman I married and the mother who raised me had known each other, really known each other, for over 20 years. Before I was part of anyone's story, every fight in my marriage, every slammed door, every tearful apology and uneasy dinner and night I lay awake wondering why two people I loved seemed to hate each other so completely, none of it had anything to do with me. I was never the husband in this story. I was the weapon. And neither of them ever told me. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old. 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I had just married Natalie, a woman I described to literally everyone as the most remarkable person I'd ever met. She was sharp and perceptive in a way that could feel like being seen under a spotlight. Beautiful in that effortless way that made people on the street glance back without realizing they'd done it. She had this quiet intensity about her, like she was always thinking 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation she was in. I thought that intensity was passion. I had no idea what it actually was. My mother, Eleanor, is a different kind of force. Composed, precise. The kind of woman who smiles at funerals and you spend the whole drive home wondering what she was actually feeling. She raised me alone after my father disappeared from our lives when I was 6, and she did it without ever once asking anyone for help. I have spent my entire life admiring her. I was so proud to introduce these two women to each other. The first dinner was at a restaurant, neutral ground, I'd thought. Clever, right? I remember the lighting was warm, the food was good. I remember feeling genuinely happy. I was watching two people I loved prepare to become part of the same life. And then it happened. It lasted less than a second. A flicker. If I had looked down at my menu at that exact moment, I would have missed it completely. But I didn't look down. I was watching both of them, and when Natalie extended her hand across the table to shake my mother's hand, something passed between their eyes that had nothing to do with meeting for the first time. It was recognition. Cold, controlled, and mutual. I blinked. They both smiled. The moment dissolved into small talk and wine orders. I told myself I had imagined it. I want you to remember that. I told myself that. The tension crept in so quietly, I kept finding reasons to explain it away. At dinners, Natalie would say something small, a comment about my mother's cooking, a gentle observation about how Eleanor always seemed to have an opinion ready, and my mother would go silent in that particular way she had. Not hurt silent, calculating silent. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like an absence. It feels like a room filling with something you can't see. I noticed, but I didn't act. I thought, 2 strong women. Give it time. Then my mother started calling more than usual. Not big conversations, short ones, casual. But the questions were specific in a way I couldn't place. Where exactly did Natalie grow up? What did her father do? Has she ever mentioned living in this city before she moved here? I told her what I knew, which wasn't much. I remember thinking, she just wants to feel connected to Natalie's life. She's trying. I actually thought she was trying. But then something happened at home that I haven't been able to fully explain since. Natalie had a small drawer in our bedroom, personal things, she'd told me when we moved in. Old letters, photographs, a journal. I never opened it. I respected her privacy the way I assumed she respected mine. One evening I came home early from work, 40 minutes ahead of schedule. The apartment was quiet and I walked down the hallway and Natalie was standing completely still in the bedroom doorway. The drawer was open behind her. She heard my footsteps and turned around. And I want to be precise about this because it matters. The expression on her face was not surprise. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't the face of someone caught doing something they shouldn't. It was relief. Pure, exhaled relief. Like she had just finished something with 30 seconds to spare. I asked what she was doing. She said she was looking for her passport. I nodded. I said, okay. I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. But I kept thinking about the drawer. Because we kept our documents, passports, certificates, everything official, in a box on the top shelf of the hallway closet, on the opposite side of the apartment entirely. I didn't say anything that night. I should have said something that night. 6 months into our marriage, the house stopped feeling like a home. It felt like a chessboard where every conversation was a move I didn't fully understand. Natalie had developed this talent for saying things that didn't sound like attacks until you thought about them later. She would mention my mother to my friends, my cousins, my aunt. Small comments, nothing dramatic, always wrapped in the language of concern. Eleanor means well. I think she's just very attached to Daniel. That kind of thing. Then my aunt called me. She said, "Daniel, is everything okay with your mother? Natalie mentioned she showed up at your place unannounced again." Again. My mother had come over once. She'd brought a birthday cake and stayed for 40 minutes. That was it. That was the whole story. But Natalie had taken that single incident, polished it, and placed it precisely in a conversation with exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. That's not irritation. That's strategy. And my mother was running her own operation in parallel. I found this out later. She had stayed in contact with 2 of Natalie's colleagues after our wedding. She would call them, always casually, always friendly, but she was asking about Natalie's past, her hometown, her family, whether she'd ever mentioned life before the city. 2 people running background checks on each other through me and everyone around me. And I was the last to see it. When it got bad enough that I couldn't ignore it, I sat them both down separately and begged for peace. I was direct. I said, "I love you both. I cannot keep doing this. Please, let's try." They both agreed, instantly, warmly. Natalie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. My mother said, "Of course, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. I want you to understand how completely I believed them. Because what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that both women had just decided the polite phase of this war was over. I don't use the word war loosely. Natalie had a recording device, small, unremarkable. She kept it in her bag and she brought it to every single family dinner, every gathering, every casual Sunday lunch where my mother was present. I only discovered this later. She wasn't just collecting moments, she was editing them, cutting, arranging, building something. I didn't know for what. Not yet. My mother made a phone call, then another. And somewhere in that process, she hired a private investigator. I found out by accident. I picked up her dry cleaning, something I'd done a dozen times, and the receipt was folded in her coat pocket. Not a tailor's receipt. A firm's name I didn't recognize, with an invoice total that stopped me cold in the middle of the parking lot. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't hesitate. She didn't stumble. She just said, "I'm protecting you, Daniel. That is all I have ever done." Said it like it was obvious, like I was the one being unreasonable for asking. I hung up and drove home and sat down across from Natalie and told her everything. Here's what I expected. Shock, anger, maybe tears. Here's what I got. She looked at me very carefully. She set down what she was holding, and then she nodded. Slowly, the way you nod when someone finally confirms something you already knew. Then she said something I have turned over in my head every single day since. She said, "Your mother is more afraid of me than you know, Daniel." Not upset with me, not out to get me, afraid. I didn't understand why she used that word. I understand now. It happened on a Tuesday. I only know that because Tuesdays were the nights Natalie worked late, and I would use that window to handle the bills. Practical, routine, boring. Nothing about that evening was supposed to matter. I was looking for a folder in the home office when I found the first thing, a printed document, thick, maybe 40 pages. Natalie's full name on the cover sheet, a private investigation report, organized, detailed, exhaustive. My mother's investigator had traced her life backward across 2 decades. addresses, employment records, family history, photographs, all the way to a small town 3 hours outside the city where Natalie had grown up. My mother had been building a file on my wife since before we were engaged. I sat with that for a moment. And then I found the second thing. A USB drive. Hidden inside an old book on Natalie's shelf. The kind of hiding place you'd only find if you were really looking, or if you happened to pull out the wrong book by accident. I plugged it in. I pressed play. And for the next 40 minutes, I listened to my mother's voice. Recordings from dinners, phone calls, casual conversations at family events. Natalie had been collecting them for months, and she had edited them, carefully, intentionally, arranging the clips so that my mother sounded manipulative, erratic, threatening even. Taken out of context, each clip felt like evidence of something dark. Natalie was building a case against my mother, a formal case, documented, organized, with a clear purpose I still didn't know how to name. I sat down on the floor of that office, not on the chair, the floor, both of them, simultaneously. Running operations I had no knowledge of, in the same apartment, sometimes in the same room, using the same people, building files on each other through me. And the question that wouldn't stop wasn't how, it wasn't even when. It was the one that had been there since that first dinner, since that flicker of recognition across a restaurant table. Why? I confronted Natalie that same night. I didn't go in angry. I went in carefully. I spread everything out on the table in front of her. The USB drive, the questions I didn't have answers to, and I told her something I meant completely. I'm not here to fight. I just need to understand. I chose that word specifically. Understand. She looked at everything on the table. Then she looked at me. And something shifted in her face. Not guilt exactly. More like a decision being made in real time. She told me the truth. 22 years ago, my mother Eleanor was a senior partner at a finance company. Natalie's father worked there as an account manager. A quiet man, Natalie said, who was dedicated to his job and his family, and not much else. He was accused of financial misconduct. It was serious enough to end his career immediately. He spent years fighting the allegation. He lost his reputation, his savings, his health, piece by piece in the process. He died 3 years before Natalie and I ever crossed paths. He never cleared his name. The person who filed the original complaint, the accusation that started all of it, was my mother. Natalie had spent years investigating whether what my mother did was justified or fabricated. She had moved to this city with a single purpose, to get close enough to Eleanor to find out what really happened, to find proof, to finally understand whether her father's entire life had been destroyed because of something he actually did, or because of something my mother decided to say about him. And then, in the middle of all of that, she met me. She told me she hadn't planned on falling in love. She said it quietly, almost to herself. She said she was sorry. And I believe she meant it. I still believe she meant it. But she also told me she had never stopped. Not for a single day. She had kept building the case the entire time we were dating, the entire engagement, our entire marriage. I sat there trying to hold two realities at once. The woman who looked at me at the altar. The woman who hid a recording device in her bag at every family dinner. And then she said one more thing. The thing that changed the shape of the whole evening. She said, "Daniel, your mother knew who I was before your second date." I drove to my mother's house that same night. I didn't call ahead. I wanted her unrehearsed. I wanted the version of her that hadn't had an hour to compose herself and decide what story to tell me. She opened the door and looked at my face, and I saw it. That brief instant before the composure settled back into place. She already knew. Somehow, she already knew the conversation had shifted. She stepped aside. She let me in. She put the kettle on, like it was a Sunday visit. I told her everything. All of it. Natalie's father, the accusation, the years Natalie spent building a case, the reason she had moved to this city, the reason she had gotten close to me. My mother sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened to every word without interrupting once. When I finished, she nodded. Once. The slow, calm nod of someone who already knows the ending of the story you're telling them. Then she told me her own. She had recognized Natalie's surname before our third date. She had quietly confirmed who she was before Natalie ever sat across from her at a dinner table. She had known from nearly the beginning exactly who my girlfriend was, where she came from, and precisely why she was in this city. She had known, and she had said nothing. I asked her the question I had been afraid to ask since the moment Natalie told me the story. I asked her, was the accusation true? What really happened to Natalie's father? My mother looked out the window for a long time, long enough that I started counting in my head. Then she said, "It was complicated. Not yes, not no, complicated." And in that single word, I understood that I was never going to get what I came for. Because there was no clean answer. There never had been. This was a war that had started 22 years ago in a conference room in an office building that I had never set foot in, between two people whose history I had known nothing about, and it had been running underground ever since. My mother had watched Natalie come into my life. She had watched us fall in love. She had sat at our engagement dinner and smiled. She had stood in the front row at our wedding. She had watched me build an entire life with a woman she knew was there to destroy her. And she had said nothing. Not because she didn't know, because she was waiting, letting the board arrange itself, preparing a response on her own timeline, in her own way, with me positioned exactly where she needed me. She had used me just as deliberately as Natalie had, just more patiently. That was the moment I finally understood what I was. Not a husband, not a son. A piece on a board that two people had been playing on for over 2 decades. And I had walked onto this board with complete sincerity, thinking I was the one making moves. I sat in my car outside my mother's house for a long time before I could make myself drive. I kept thinking about a photograph, not the one from the kitchen, an earlier one. It had slipped out of the private investigator's report weeks before I understood what any of it meant. A man standing outside a courthouse. Natalie's father. An ordinary-looking face. Dark circles under his eyes. The posture of someone who has been fighting something for so long that fighting has simply become his resting state. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I thought about my mother, who built a life from nothing, who made sure I had everything, who smiled through every difficulty I can remember and never once let me see her afraid. I thought about Natalie, who made a plan and followed it for years, and then somewhere inside that plan looked at a person who had no idea what was happening and felt something she hadn't accounted for. Or at least, that's what she told me. The honest answer is, I still don't know. I don't know if my mother's accusation was an act of justice or a calculated destruction of a man who got in her way. I don't know if Natalie ever truly loved me, or if I was always just the most useful door available to her. I don't know if my mother's silence was meant to protect me, or simply to buy herself time. What I know is this. I stood at an altar in front of everyone I loved, and I meant every word I said. There wasn't a single dishonest moment in that ceremony. Not for me. I was just a man who loved a woman, who loved his mother, who thought the tension in his home was the ordinary friction of two strong personalities sharing space. He was the only innocent person in that room. And sometimes, at 2 a.m, I still grieve for him, for that version of me who had no idea what he'd walked into. Because I can't go back to being him. Once you see the board, you can't unsee it. Once you understand that the war around you started before you were even born, you have to figure out who you are now that you know. I'm still figuring that out. Honestly, I've told this story a dozen times in my head, and I still can't decide who was truly in the wrong. My mother, who buried something for 20 years and watched it walk through my front door without saying a word? Natalie, who turned her grief into a strategy and then had to live inside that strategy every single day of our marriage. Or me, for seeing the signs early and choosing over and over to look the other way. If you were standing where I was standing, who would you believe? I genuinely don't know the right answer. And I want to know what you think, because I've been carrying this alone for long enough. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and right now, I need to hear from people who aren't inside this story. And if this kind of story stays with you, if you're going to be thinking about Eleanor and Natalie and that courthouse photograph at 2 in the morning, then subscribe to the channel. Every week there's another story about the things that happen behind closed doors in families that look completely normal from the outside. Because the most shocking secrets are always the ones hiding in plain sight.